Hey there. My name is Raleigh Cosplay. This is my intro to Blender for Cosplay tutorial, which I've taught at Cosplay America and at GalaxyCon Raleigh. This is part one, getting started. So who the heck am I? Again, I go by Raleigh Cosplay. I've been doing cosplay for 6 years, but more importantly, I was an educator for 18 years. I started the first cosplay creation class in the state of North Carolina at Research Triangle High School. I'm very proud of that accomplishment, and my major focus is on 3D modeling and fabrication, 3D printing and finishing. And the main tool that I use for 3D modeling is Blender. So that's what we're going to be talking about here in this workshop. What is Blender? Blender is great, is what it is. It is, first of all, it is the industry standard for 3D modeling. It is what is used by everybody. And second of all, it's completely free, which is sort of remarkable, right? Usually the industry standard tools like the Adobe suite, for example, cost a great deal of money. Blender is free, and it is the thing. It's what everybody uses. The downside of Blender, well, it's an upside and a downside. The upside of Blender is it's used for everything, right? It's used for 3D rendering, it's used for animation, it's used for making 3D models for printing like we use. The downside is because it is so versatile, it is so powerful, it's rather tricky to use. I think of this as the Photoshop problem. Whenever you have a piece of software that can do just about anything, getting it to do even a single small thing can be kind of tricky. It can be certainly very daunting to come into the software and see all of these buttons and all of these windows and wonder, where do I even start? The good news is that as a cosplayer, as a 3D printer, we are only using maybe 10% of what Blender is capable of. And so that's one of the things we'll be talking about in this particular section is what is that slice of the software you actually have to pay attention to, because you're going to find that when you're only looking at what you need to look at, it becomes a lot less scary. However, if you've never done any 3D modeling before, instead of Blender, you might choose to start with something called Tinkercad. It's an excellent piece of software. It is free, it is browser-based, and it is a 3D modeling software. It is simpler than Blender, but it's going to introduce you to all of the major concepts that you're going to use when you're doing 3D modeling. Things like manipulating the 3D space, things like importing and exporting STL files, things like transforming those objects in terms of movement and scaling and rotation. All of those concepts you will get introduced to using Tinkercad. And in fact, if you're just doing basic work as a 3D modeler, that may be all you need. For many years, I just used Tinkercad. That's how I started most of my students in terms of 3D modeling. So you might start there, but if you've used Tinkercad and you feel that you can't do what you need it to do, or you want to jump into the more sophisticated stuff right away, then that's where you'll come to Blender. I should make mention that Blender can deal with lots of different file types. For our work, we're going to be dealing with STL files. STL files are 3D models, but they are the sort of models that are easiest for slicing software, like the Prusa slicer, to ingest and then actually print. You might encounter .obj files or object files. Certainly if you're ripping a file from a video game, for example, they often come in as OBJ files, but the internal geometry of those files often isn't as good when it comes to 3D printing, so we are always going to be looking at STL files. So what are we going to cover in this workshop? First of all, we're going to be talking about getting into the software, clearing the workspace, setting the scene properties, just like you'd set document properties in Inkscape or in Photoshop. We'll talk about what is the heart of Blender as far as we're concerned, and those are meshes. Those are objects within the world comprised of vertices. We'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about how to manipulate those meshes, how to transform them, to rescale them, to move them around. We'll talk about the built-in file system that is used in Blender to keep all of those meshes organized and named. We'll look at the Properties tab, how you can more fine-grained control the transformations of these meshes. And then we'll also take a look at modifiers, which is a little bit more daunting, a little bit more advanced work, but it's where a lot of the real power of Blender comes out, is the application of modifiers to those meshes. So all of those things we'll cover pretty much everything you need to know in Blender to be successful. So hopefully in the next 25 minutes or so, we'll be able to cover all those concepts. And then in our next videos, we will touch on 2 other workflows to actually put those into practice, one involving Boolean together these meshes, the other involving extending planes and turning these basic ideas into full pieces. But let's go ahead and get into the software and take a look. So to get started, you're going to go to blender.org. And you'll go to download, and you will download Blender for whatever your system is. It's a version 4.4.3 right now. I'm still working on Blender 3.5, so there may be some small variations here, but once you've downloaded the free software, you'll open up Blender, and this is what it will look like as you start, and you're just going to choose General, and that will get you into the software. It's always going to start with these 3 objects here. This is a camera, which would be great if we were doing animation, but we're not, so you can just hit delete and get rid of it. This is a light source, again, great if we were doing animation, but we don't need it. And then we've got this cube, which is our first mesh. We'll leave it there for a moment. The other thing you can do as you first come in is come over to this tab. There are all these tabs you see here to the right. You don't need to touch almost any of them. But just sometimes when you come in, setting up the scene, setting up the units, and I like to choose units in centimeters, and that means that a length of 1 here is going to be 1 centimeter. That's usually pretty good for prop and cosplay modeling. So that's pretty much the only thing you need to touch when it comes to scene properties. When it comes to moving around the space, this is where a mouse with a middle key is useful. Scroll middle key will get you to scroll in and out. Holding down the middle key, you can rotate. And then by holding Shift and the middle key, you can pan around the space. So just spending some time sort of getting and moving around the space until that becomes second nature will be sort of useful for you. You see these main axes in red and green. There's also a z-axis in blue. The other way you can move around the space is this little star up here, which allows you to align. Now I'm perfectly aligned with the x-axis, now perfectly aligned with the y-axis, now looking straight down from the z-axis. So you can move this around as well to manipulate the space. And you can also use the key bindings of 1, 2, 3. Each of the numeric keys is bound to a different specific view. 2 of them, the 1 and the 3 that go between the y and the x-axis, are going to be useful for one of the workflows that we do. I should make a mention, by the way, really sophisticated people who use Blender use key bindings. Everything that we talk about here is going to have a specific key binding for it. And as you get going, those key bindings will speed up your workflow enormously. I'm not going to be mentioning too many key bindings in this video, however, for the first reason, because I often forget them when I'm trying to present, and more people always forget them when they've watched a video, and it's like, well, what was that specific key? So I'm going to talk about concepts and where the buttons are, and sometimes where what the key binding is, but typically you'll want to have a reference for key bindings if you think that's going to speed up your flow a little bit. And if you think that makes me a less sophisticated user for not mentioning the key bindings, you're very welcome to think about that. So that's the 3D space. That's the sort of intro as we get in here. And now let's look at this cube. This cube is what we call a mesh. And meshes are the heart of Blender. They are the heart and soul of Blender. I'm going to get rid of this one so you can see about adding them. You come up here to add mesh, and there's all of these other things. Ignore them. As is true for so much in Blender, being able to use it means knowing what you can ignore, and the vast majority of these you can just ignore, but mesh is your friend. And we see these, there's all different types of meshes, but these basic shapes, planes and cubes and circles and spheres, are going to be where we do the bulk of our work. So let's add ourselves a cube. A mesh is an object that we can do things to. We'll talk about doing those things. But more specifically, I'll come into edit mode. We'll talk about that in just a moment. What it is a collection of points. We call these points vertices. You can see me selecting them. And wherever you have a point in space that's we've got two vertices that connect to each other, we call that an edge. There's 4 edges on the top, and they go down the sides, and then there's 4 edges at the bottom. So we have these 8 vertices making those edges, and those edges enclose the 6 faces. So any given mesh has faces that are defined by edges, and those edges are defined by vertices. So that's what we mean by a mesh of vertices that connect together to define a 3-dimensional shape. Now you saw me going between object mode and edit mode, which I do up here. This is one key binding you probably want. Tab will switch you between those two. Again, there's some other modes up here. Ignore them. We will never touch them for what we are doing. But object and edit mode, we absolutely will. So in object mode, we're dealing with the entire mesh. In edit mode, we'll be dealing with those vertices or edges or faces. So here in object mode, we can do some things to this mesh. These are called transformations. We can move it around. We can, when we choose move, these handles appear. We could just grab it and move it around like a wild person. Oh, I got the wrong thing there. Like that, but I find that's not particularly helpful moving in 3D space. So I tend to grab these handles and move it along a given axis at a given time. You can also, there are key bindings for this. You can see G for grab and then say Z, and it will only move along the Z axis, or G and then Y, and it will only move along the Y axis, and you can see that. But again, honestly, I just use the handles. I'm not a very sophisticated person. So that's moving through the space. And you can rotate it. Again, there are handles. This one will rotate it around the x-axis, and this green will rotate it around the y-axis, and the same thing for the blue around the z-axis. So those are rotations, and then of course you can scale as well. You can scale it along each of those axes as well. And so those 3 things, scaling and rotating and moving, are the basic transformations that you're going to be doing to objects. I'll undo those various transformations here real quick, get back to the origin. I mentioned that you're not going to be using these tabs very much, but one that you will use is this, is this my properties? Where are my properties? That was my little orange properties tab. Yes, it is. This is my properties tab. It was in a slightly different place. You can also get to this properties tab with this little guy up here. But in all these cases, you can see here are the qualities of those transforms. Here's our location. We see it's actually right now, it's not exactly at the origin. So let me put those zeros in. And now we see it's moved back to the origin. So if you want to be very precise instead of using the handles, you can literally manipulate the properties themselves here. Let's say I want to have a 45-degree rotation along the x-axis, and there we are. And let's say I want to scale it twice as much along the y-axis. We go from 1 to 2. Hit enter, and there we go. So using the properties is another, maybe more precise way to make these changes. And you see in it, here we also have, this is the pop-up bar. I'll do this one more time because there's a little, like I said, it's not entirely clear where that little pop-out X is. But we see here are the actual centimeter lengths. That's the nice thing about Blender is that when we actually print it, as long as we've got our exporting set 1-to-1, it will be 200 centimeters in one direction, 400 centimeters in the other, and it makes printing very useful. So that's how to manipulate the properties of the object itself. I should make a quick notice that these transformations are still being applied to the original object. So we see that in the background, it's still remembering that original cube and saying, hey, tip that cube 45 degrees and then scale it twice up along the y-axis. So it's sort of holding on to the cube itself in its memory. If we want to say, okay, we're done with these transformations, we don't want you to think about that cube anymore, this is the thing itself. It is the object we're dealing with is 45 degrees off of the x-axis. you're going to come up here to Object, to Transform. That's what these are. These are transforms, and choose Apply. Oh, I'm sorry, it's actually under Apply. It is Apply All Transforms. And now we see that those have, we choose the object. Those have, well, those should have reset. Why didn't that reset? Object, Apply, All Transforms. Yes, now we see that's reset. I just hadn't selected things properly. Because now we're saying, okay, it's no longer an object that's tipped off the x-axis. We're saying this is the shape of the object itself in its true relationship to the axis. This is a more sophisticated concept. If that doesn't make any sense to you, just ignore it. You can be very successful in Blender without ever thinking of that. But when you're dealing with a build that has maybe hundreds of different objects, and that you're scaling them and you're rotating them and you're Boolean them together and apart, making sure that you apply those transformations can become fairly important. And they're particularly important when we get to the modifiers. So that's how to transform a mesh. And that can give you some power. You can make things bigger, you can rotate them, but the real power comes, I'm hitting Tab to enter into edit mode, when you realize that every one of these vertices that make up the object can be transformed in the same way. And in fact, if you look at the right, there's all kinds of other tools we can apply as well to these. But just very basically here, I've just selected this vertex. So just as I could move an object, I can move the vertex. I'll grab the handles and move it around. And now we have a rather interesting different polyhedron. And similarly, I could select edges and select this edge over here and rotate the whole edge. And now we're getting something rather more interesting than just a cube, right? And similarly, I could select a whole face and I could scale the whole face just as I scaled the object. And now this face scales down, and now we begin to see something that's not a cube at all, but a rather sophisticated object. And you can begin to get a sense of, oh yeah, with this kind of manipulation of the vertex or the face or the edge, I could build whatever I want to, and that is the power of Blender. We will go more deeply in the two workflows about how you do that specifically, but this is just introducing this concept of making these kind of manipulations. The one additional thing I'll make mention of here is oftentimes you want to be able to make that kind of fine-grained change that requires moving a vertex around, and you don't have a vertex. You can always just select an edge and right-click, and there's all kinds of different things here. You make use of some of these. We'll go into some of these in some of the other videos, but you can subdivide it. And now instead of one edge, there's two edges, and of course wherever an edge meets another edge, there's a vertex. So now I've got a vertex there, and I can move that about, and we have a little edge there. So now we have a rather more complicated polyhedron than we came in here to begin with. So that is the edit mode. And going back to object mode, let me go ahead and add another simple thing here. Again, there's all kinds of different shapes. If I wanted to, I could, where's my, yeah, you can do like meatballs, which are all kinds of weird, sometimes organic shapes and that kind of thing. But we're going to be sticking with our basic meshes, which can also be complicated. They give us a little monkey. Let's move our monkey out. Hey there, monkey. Talk about the monkey in a little bit because he's a little grainy right now, but we'll move him to the side. And we'll add another object here, another cube, just for comparison between our polyhedron and our cube and our monkey. Now, if you were noticing as I was adding those meshes, things were changing in the upper right-hand corner. This is the built-in file system. Because when you have many different objects moving around all these different meshes, you need some way to keep them straight. You can rename them, of course. When you make an object that's the same thing, it will automatically sort of rename it as .001 or whatever. We can call this guy cube. We can actually call this guy polyhedron because that's what he is. And we can name this guy cube. And the monkey's named Suzanne. I didn't even know that. Then you can also make collections. Come over here, right-click, new collection. um, modified shapes, and we can drag our polyhedron into modified. And you can use this, for example, if I select this collection and I say, hey, let's hide them. They're still there, but we can no longer see them. Or maybe we want to take them out entirely. Now they're no longer part of the logic, the math of this. We can add them back together. So that's how you can use collections to name and keep track of your objects. It may seem sort of simplistic right now, but again, as we get into the more sophisticated workflows, being able to keep track of your objects and your meshes is going to be quite important there. So let's see, we've talked about meshes, we've talked about adding them. Of course, you can delete them just as readily with the delete key. Basic transformations, we've talked about edit mode. So the last thing I really want to mention in this introduction is the idea of the modifier. So I'll select my polyhedron here in Object Model, get rid of this cube real quick. And as I said, most of these tabs are not necessary to us. We are going to use our Properties tab, although you can also use it up here. But we are going to be using this wrench quite a bit. This is one of the most powerful parts of Blender. It can also be one of the more daunting parts of Blender. And this is the idea of adding a modifier. There are all of these very cool, very neat modifiers you can add to a object. You can bevel the edges. You can reflect them and mirror them. In one of our workflows, we'll actually make use of that. You can solidify a flat object and give it depth. So all of these are very powerful, and we'll get into some of them. We'll talk about subdivision surface in our first workflow video, but I want to introduce you to one that is the most powerful, and it's going to be used in any workflow you do, and that's the idea of the Boolean. Boolean is a term from computer science that basically means this or that, true or false, one or two. A Boolean value is true or false. So we're saying with a Boolean modifier, we're going to make an object that is either this or this and that, or this not that, if you think of those sort of logical comparisons. If that makes sense to you, what I just said, great, fantastic. If it doesn't, just realize that a Boolean is a way of sticking things together and cutting things apart. So how do we do that? Let me add ourselves a very regular little cube again. So let's say that what we want to do is very simply, we want to stick this cube and this polyhedron together. We want to make them one object. Well, Boolean is the way we do that. You can also use the join function. It's a slightly simpler way in Blender, but we're going to talk about Booleans here, so we'll use a Boolean for that. Quick hint, just to save you some time, if you're going to be sticking things together, you want to keep them aligned, and there is a way to do that. Select an object, click Shift to select another object. Now these are both selected. Come up here to Object, Transform, Align Objects. It comes, give you a little menu down here, and then you can choose the axes that you want to have these aligned to. And they will align their centers to that. So this will get them aligned in this way. I think we just want them aligned along the z-axis. I would spend oftentimes a long time trying to scoot things and zoom in and scoot them about to keep them aligned, because I didn't know about this particular ability. So just make your life a little bit easier and use that. Now, of course, they don't look entirely aligned here because our polyhedron is a rather strange object. Let me just do a quick check here. Yeah. Origin to geometry, just making sure that the origin, the center of it, is in fact in the center of the geometry, which it is. Sometimes when you copy an object, the origin, where the handles is, ends up where the copied object originally was, and so, or the changed object was, and so you have to right-click, set origin to geometry to make sure that the center of it actually is in the center of the geometry. Again, just a little tip along the way. So you've aligned your objects. Now let's say we want to stick them together. What we're going to do is we're going to select our object here. we are going to say we want to union them together. We're going to then use the dropper to select our cube. And now our original object is that object plus our other object. Now it doesn't look like that right now, but if we hide our cube, we see, oh, now our polyhedron is actually the cube and the polyhedron. Or we could say, actually, I want it to be a hole. So now we have a cube-shaped hole in the polyhedron. We are taking the difference of polyhedron minus cube. Or actually, what I want is the intersection. I only want the part where both the polyhedron and the cube exist. So that's the different types of Boolean. But let's say we, in fact, do want to union them. Now, keep in mind, this hasn't actually stuck the cube to the polyhedron yet. This is, modifiers are basically an illusion. They're saying, we're going to take this thing and do this thing to it, but it hasn't been done yet. So for example, if I unhide my cube and I move my cube around, grab my cube and move it around, then what we see with our polyhedron, hide my cube again, is that, let's do the difference, it becomes more obvious. Now that hole has moved. If I choose my cube and I move it someplace else, and hide it again, that hole has moved yet again, because that hole isn't in the polyhedron yet. We haven't actually cut the polyhedron. We're saying, hey, polyhedron, this is a rule. This modifier is a rule. Wherever you are and there's a cube, we want to take the cube away. But for example, if I were to go to edit mode, we would see, hey, that polyhedron looks exactly the same. There's no hole in it at all. I see the exact same number of vertices and faces I saw before. But when I come to object mode, now this rule, this Boolean, is being applied. So let's go ahead. I'm going to select these again. I'm going to align them, transform, align objects. I am going to come to my polyhedron. I'm going to say it's actually a union I want. And now I'm going to hide my cube. Yep, that's what I want it to look like. And now we're going to go ahead and apply it. We're going to say, instead of taking my polyhedron and saying wherever there's a cube, I now want to actually make my polyhedron have a cube part to it. So I come over to here and I apply. Now I could hide my cube and move this around. Now I can unhide my cube. I move my cube, does nothing to the other thing, because now it's not a modifier. Now we've actually modified this. And if I come into edit mode, sorry, my tab isn't working. Now I see, oh, I've got all kinds of interesting faces and edges and vertices now. My very simple polyhedron is now much more complicated, and I've created new faces and new edges by this Boolean operation. So that is the Boolean concept. That's something we're going to be talking about a lot. So those are the basic ideas in Blender. We haven't really made much of anything yet except this strange lumpy kind of object. But we've now touched on all of the tools that we're going to be using in our workflows. So that's just been a quick introduction about the various parts of Blender. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments below. I'll do my best to get back with answers to those questions. And please do check out the other 2 videos in this playlist, which are 2 practical workflows to start to use those tools to actually make your own 3D models. At this point in time, I'm supposed to tell you to like and comment and subscribe. Please only do that if it seems valuable and useful for you, but please do have fun as you start with your 3D modeling.